Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, and here in South Pasadena with a really iconic cat. He's a bass player and an actor and so much more. Carson Smith, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you, Jake, and thanks for taking the time to do this. First of all, disclaimer, I'm not an actor. I was in a movie, but, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep, Denzel Washington, those are actors. I'm just a schmuck who was in a movie. And also I just want to say about the piece I just recorded for you guys, that for about 10 years I was playing this thing called the Sweet and Hot Festival, and a guy named Wally, oh God, why can't I think of his name? Wally, he was a great guy. It was his production, and it was a big deal for all the world. It was all these guys who were playing music of the 20s, and they're very serious. They were just as serious as I am about music, as serious as I was when I was 21 about bebop. These guys are serious, and it's. I learned a long time ago that creativity trumps style. That you can be creative in any style. And, a good example is Bach. You can't play Bach and not realize it's creative. And so they would put me with these guys. I didn't know any of these songs. I didn't know why they kept calling me, and they put me with people, and one guy says, well, we're going to play this Louis Armstrong. He says, do you know Blues My Naughty Sweetie gave to me? I said, no, I've never even heard the title. And so they started going through the tune, and I went, my God, I know this. How do I know this tune? How could I know this? It's a very complicated tune, and very complicated. Like a lot of those old Dixie tunes they have like 6 parts, and they change keys a couple times, and that's part of the tune. Anyway, this was about 3 choruses in when we were performing it. About the 3rd chorus in, I suddenly realized we're playing Aerogen. And it was just like Aerogen, except the spot in the first half of Aerogen where Sonny Rollins goes through a bunch of key changes. With Louis Armstrong, it was just whatever it was, 8 bars or 6 bars of just B flat 7, and then the C. So he did, but otherwise the form and the half step changes and all that stuff was all Aerogen. And then later in my reading, Sonny Rollins mentioned what a great influence Louis Armstrong was. And another instance that I was playing with one of the most creative and prolific and writers of music was a guy named Dick Carey. And there was it called his Tuesday Night Friends, and it was all these people, and I was the youngest guy by 25 years. I was 40 at the time. And these were all old guys who had been in big bands, lead trumpet player for Artie Shaw and stuff like that, and Tommy Newsom played in the band, and Abe and Sam Most and Betty O'Hara. And these were great players of the Zoot Sims era type playing, and I used to think of Louis Armstrong as somebody I loved, as you just when you couldn't see him see him on TV or anything, and not smile, because he was such a beautiful person. And but I never thought of him as a musical giant. He was just a character. And so anyway, different people would come to town and come and visit Dick, see the band, Dick Carey, and so this guy comes in. I think his name was Bud Freeman or Bruz Freeman or something like that. And he and Dick are talking. They're just talking, and the guys in the band, and there's about 18 people in the band. The guys are, how they are. The band is, and smoking or whatever they're doing, and. So this guy in the front says, I spent 4 days with Louis, such and such. And those guys all snapped to attention, like all conversation ceased, and they were focused like the way I would have been about Charlie Parker. If somebody said, well, I spent 4 days with Charlie Parker. Oh, what did he eat? I want to know everything about him, and young guys today, it would be about Coltrane, and like, oh my God,
He was a hero of yours.
What's that?
These guys were heroes for you in terms of
Yeah.
Bird.
Louis was a giant to them, and I said, "Oh my God, I'm missing something." So I went home and got on YouTube and found these recordings from films of Louis Armstrong in I believe either Sweden or Denmark, 31 or 32 or 33. And he's playing stuff like Dinah and I Cover the Waterfront, and I could sense that this was really creative. And then, like I was talking about Sonny Rollins, like I ate up Sonny Rollins' records. I went through 2 copies of Saxophone Colosse and turned them gray.
Wow.
You know, I had to buy another one because I know every note of those things. And so Louis playing this thing, and he goes in and he plays like a long phrase, like 4-bar phrase, you know. And my God, Sonny Rollins played that exact phrase, note for note, time for time, on Saxophone Colossus, you know. And
Wow.
I went,
The lineage.
holy Christ, you know, have I been missing something, you know? And that's been a kind of a thing. As I get older, my tastes broaden. You know, I begin really digging people that I really dug when I was 13. You know, they're not as good as they were. I mean, an example is Dave Brubeck, who I was crazy about when I was 11 or 12. I mean, I couldn't get enough of Dave Brubeck, and gee, I wish the alto player wouldn't play so many choruses.
Desmond.
You know. And I was into music on that level because my brother, Carson Smith, was a very famous bass player in Los Angeles at that time, in the world. He'd recorded many albums with the Jerry Mulligan Quartet.
Chico.
And and then later on he was in the Chico Hamilton. And he was, when Chet Baker broke away from the quartet, Carson was with him and went to touring with him and all that stuff. So he told me at one time, I interviewed him when he was dying, and so I interviewed him for 4 days and taped it all.
Wow.
And he said he was on something like 150 recordings in the early 50s on the West Coast. And he recorded with Charlie Parker. He's credited on a Billie Holiday recording, and
Is that verified or he's credited?
Well, I have a copy of the record. It's got his name on it, but it doesn't sound like him to me.
Really?
You know, and but he's. I asked him what record he was most proud of, and he said, "Well, I made a record with Harpo Marx." And he says, "I love that."
Dude. Well, anyway, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to ask you about a couple of people. Even though you are definitely not a professional actor, you were around people that did cultivate and were seeking talent outside of just melodic invention. And I was one of them is Mason Williams. Mason used to go to these folk clubs and discover, people would have to get up there and do their shtick for a week, and like someone like Steve Martin would get up there and riff and joke and play banjo. But ultimately, these are how guys were discovered. One cat I wanted to ask you about was Ken Kesey. Did you ever cross paths with Ken Kesey or any of the Merry Pranksters?
Only on paper, and I just think he was a great writer. And it's too bad he stopped.
He was a wannabe. He did want to act, except he got beat out by Paul Newman. And a lot of people don't know that. He was down.
Ken Kesey got beat out by. Well, that's a pretty good person to get beat out by.
Would you say that, like, who were some of the cats that used to come to see you play that were not musicians? Like Wilt Chamberlain had his own clubs. He had his own jazz club. He had his own record label with Merle Saunders up in San Francisco.
Okay.
There's a lot of crossovers. So which entertainers used to come and see you, whatever amalgamation you were in? But I'm just saying, like, because now you have a situation where, well, even today, you talk about Sonny Rollins, or you go back 60 years to the Village Vanguard, Lou Tabakin might look up and see Miles or Sonny in the crowd. Mm-hmm. Musicians were there. But the other thing that's been revelatory to me on this journey is how the cross entertainment was also very sophisticated. Cosby, I've done 2 interviews with before the world caved in on. That guy was a massive jazz freak. So who used to come check you out?
Well, you mentioned Wilt Chamberlain. He came into a club. He used to come into a club where I was playing. I never considered him to be a fan of mine. In fact, I don't keep track of that sort of thing, and I'm always surprised when somebody knows my work. Um, See, famous people who I've been around really a lot of famous people, and my philosophy is, you're a person, I'm a person,
Well,
this that just like that, and and I mean, if I were in a room with Robert De Niro, I'd say, well, man, thanks a lot for all the great pleasure you've given me, but I would try not to get gushy or anything like that, but. Well, see.
I mean, I mean, a lot of the beat poets, Kerouac and Ginsberg and those guys, a lot of them did write in a language of bebop. They popularized some of the music in a literary form.
I agree with that.
Right? And can you talk a little bit about, at least when you were, I mean, that might have not have been a conscious thing for you, but the point is that in civilization, I don't even know if we have a culture today. It's more like just one big civilization. That's what Charlie Persick told me. And I just wonder about if you could even talk about when your brother, or how that overlap of entertainment lent itself to jazz melodic invention being the popular music of the day. Because it was not just in isolation, or it wasn't just look at me, it was pop music.
Okay, the difference between pop music now and pop music then.
Just riff on any way you want. But I'm doing a book on the Merry Pranksters and the Beats, and how they laid the groundwork for the psychedelic music movement, because there would be none without them. So I'm just in terms of jazz, the cross entertainment, or just in general, just what helped it become popular music outside of the music.
Well, this is a pretty broad subject. I'm very aware of the change in music. I hesitate saying the degeneration of it, but
Retrograde.
But the thing about pop that is different is the harmonic structure it's built on is very shallow. And I know there's marvelous performances and some marvelous words, a lot of not, and very, very limited. Well, see, I don't listen to it, so I really can't.
Why don't you just go back to the time that when you were coming up and what it was like?
Well, it came out of classical music, and I mean, like Chopin was a huge influence on Cole Porter, and a huge influence on Joe Beam, and I think that the Great American Songbook was which is the music of the 30s and 40s, was a continuation of the great classical music, and certainly a continuation of great melody, and if you think of Shakespeare as a great writer of words, then it was trying to be like that, as opposed to kind of folk music kind of stuff. And I don't want to sound like I'm putting any of it down, like folk music or anything like that, but the reality is, as I said, the harmonic structure of that music was profound, and now it's very often there's one chord for a whole song, or two chords, or three, and then sometimes there's four. Wow, and it's extremely diatonic. Okay, it doesn't get into key changes, key center changes. Anyway,
this was different with Dolphy and Mingus. These guys were taken. In fact, Donald Duck Bailey, rest in peace, he told me that the African American aesthetic with jazz was that, as it related to the American songbooks, that they made their own heads to the tunes, and then they would, essentially you'd get bored of playing the same tune over and over again, and so eventually then you'd stretch out, leave the head of the tune, and you never played the same song the same way once. Do you remember that first opportunity you had to really do that? Because as far as I'm concerned, there were Limelighter records with Earl Palmer playing drums on them, right? So I mean, they were swinging. right? I mean, to me, it's more about rhythm, the change in rhythm, the quantized form of rhythm.
Well,
You talk about everything being an 8/8.
okay, yeah, that is another big change. Geez, to make blanket statements, like it doesn't swing. Well, some of it swings, and some of it's got a swing feel to it. And then people say, "Well, swing. Oh, that's so so."
Outdated.
They don't
Yeah.
say outre, but that's what they mean. And but to me, that's an essential part of what I consider to be jazz, and that comes from Africa, and that swinging thing, and it's like. I had the good fortune to work with Art Blakey for a short time, and he would preach to the crowd, and he would say, "Hey, this is not black music, this is not white music. It was both of us. It didn't happen in Africa, it didn't happen in France. It happened here
Damn.
when there was a cross. And so he was very encouraging to a young white bass player, and." But I feel like that's such an essential part of it, and then another essential part, in my opinion, is the harmonic structures that they need to be. You can play a song written on the rhythm changes and all that stuff, but I calculated about 25 years ago. I laid in bed